Ikemoto is already hinting at the secrets behind Boruto's sword, this so-called compound or material that Sumire has added, and the fact that Boruto's sword has already started to evolve. If you take a look at Boruto's sword before he started fighting versus Mamushi, and now that he has started fighting, it has already become darker by making contact with Mamushi. This is what we'll be discussing in this video, a breakdown about everything regarding Boruto's new sword that Ikemoto is hinting at. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and especially hype up this video so it can be pushed around to other people, because what we're going to be discussing is an absolute treat. To really begin this all, we have to truly break down the scroll that Boruto ended up giving to Sumire, as in all actuality, this is where we start to narrow down where Boruto's new raw material that has been added to his sword really comes from. The whole premise behind this scroll that we see Boruto even tell Sumire is that Sumire is going to come up with this naturally. This was something that she eventually came to understand in the future. But Boruto, using the same techniques that Kashinkoji did to him, he is giving Sumire access to new information, new technology that she would have already come up with in a future. And this is what she's getting now to speed up the process. So it means that everything that has to do with Boruto's new sword essentially revolved around Sumire, what Sumire does and what Sumire has access to. So it already narrows down some of the things that we used to think about. The fact of Momoshiki being the main premise behind Boruto's new sword, I think it removes this out of the equation. It doesn't mean that it can't be a part or a functionality, as the karma could still be something that enhances the sword, but the whole makeup of the sword did not necessarily take into consideration Momoshiki. But what it did take in consideration were the things that Sumire has learned over the years. This first means her scientific background, the things she ended up learning when she was working with the likes of Katasuke. And it also means the things that she ended up learning when she was working with the likes of Amato, but also her own personal background, and that is with Nue. The fact that she has been attached to this creature that doesn't have any origins in this dimension, as was quoted in the Sumire arc. And this is where my research has really begun, by going back and looking at the arc where Sumire was really introduced with her backstory, the fact of her connection with the Gozu Tensei, the Foundation, Danzo, and ultimately Nue. An arc where we ended up seeing Boruto's innate powers with his own genetics and the Jogan end up appearing. All of this is key to what we're seeing taking place right now. And to those who don't believe that this is canon, we have a page discussing Sumire's abilities that ends up showing Nue in the manga. So this is definitely canon. But the entire discussion of Boruto's sword truly begun to me ever since the first chapter. The fact that we had Boruto who fought Kawaki, but Kawaki didn't shrink his sword. How was that possible? This means that with Boruto's new upgraded sword, there is a few things that we can expect, and one main aspect of that is Boruto having a living property that is within Boruto's sword. We also see different things like the fact that it can drain chakra, not only from Boruto at a consistent slow amount, but from other various characters. And while watching back the Nue arc concerning Boruto Sumire, something that we ended up learning in that arc was that Sumire was the one behind all the possessions that were taking place. Various characters in a negative emotional state were taken control by Nue, where Nue's chakra would eventually envelop them, causing their repressed emotions, their negative emotions, to come at the forefront. But what was quite important that would happen afterwards is that their entire chakra would be drained. That was a main idea with Nue, and even when Nue took its final form, it would drain Sumire's chakra and the chakra of various different people that it came into contact to. It means that Nue itself as a character has a lot of properties of draining other people's chakra. And this is something we also see being represented in Boruto's sword. The fact that Boruto's chakra is drained at a consistent amount, a small amount that it is being drained to be able to enhance its various abilities, and the fact that if somebody else whose chakra signal isn't registered If they do end up using or taking Boruto's sword, their chakra is going to be drained heavily. Even though we did see similar mechanisms being showcased when we saw Boruto's lightsabers. I'm not denying the fact that there is a link there, but the amount that we even saw the lightsaber be able to take wasn't a drastic amount. He had to be using it for a large period of time. However, when Yue drains your chakra, it paralyzes you, it drains you, it makes you fall to the ground. And this is something that they're using as a safety mechanic. So if Boruto, who was able to use the lightsaber in that previous fight to fight versus different characters like Ao, it means that for his personal sword, when other characters end up using it, for it to actually be a failsafe, when the person ends up grabbing the sword, he shouldn't be able to use it, which is contrary to what was shown to us with the lightsaber. And that's the whole fact where I believe we could have seen influences from Nue, where Sumire ultimately ended up utilizing Nue as a mechanism for Boruto's sword. The way it could be implemented could be through various different means. We already know the fact that we had Amato who was able to use Shibai's Otsutsuki's DNA to enhance various characters, use nanotech to have live DNA end up being influenced by somebody else, and we could see a synthetic and artificial manner in which Nue is integrated into Boruto's sword, which would then give Boruto's sword a living property, as it would make quite a bit of sense for the fact that Boruto is capable of using it against Kawaki. But something else that is also quite important and also quite telling in the fact that Nue may be involved is the fact that it reacted to the Senju who have Telltale's DNA. And with the fact that we do see them multiple times using various sorts of wood style is something that is also linked to Nue. As in that arc, various characters who had Nue's chakra or were enveloped by this aura from Nue that caused their repressed emotions to take over, they ended up showcasing a small amount of wood style. And this was most likely due to the fact that most people who ended up being controlled were not that strong or were not known to have good chakra reserves. They were not high tier fighters that we saw ended up being controlled. And it makes a lot of sense since it was early on in the Boruto story. But for Boruto himself, there are various things that it could grant it. Boruto could develop a level of wood style that he could potentially use when he is using his sword, which increases his field of vision, makes Boruto's sword also have its own elements, something that is attached to it that Boruto doesn't naturally have. But it would also explain why Boruto is capable of interacting with the Telltales, where Boruto's sword ends up turning black when Boruto ends up fighting versus Mamushi. Boruto's sword seems to have reacted to Mamushi in some sort of form, and due to it being the Telltales, there are clear links due to the simple fact that Nue is not a creature from this planet. It's not a creature from this world. This is something that Kakashi ends up describing, that with all the various different summonings, you could end up finding their natural habitat somewhere in this world. But this was not the case for Nue, as he doesn't come from this world. And the only creatures who we know who do not come from this world, this plane of existence, are the Otsutsukis. And that's why it is quite important to see that this is something surrounding Nue, and we see that Boruto's sword, who could potentially have Nue's influence, Nue's synthetic material inside of it, causing it to be almost living, that is implemented in this manner, and that is why it reacts to the Telltales, Mamushi. But another very important power that it could end up giving Boruto is that Boruto could now be able to steal other people's chakra. Maybe the reason why Boruto's swords end up darkening is because he is stealing Mamushi's chakra at the same time. This is an ability of Nue, and one thing that is quite important with Nue is that although he is quite strong, his main purpose is to absorb a certain amount of chakra and then blow up. So what we could see take place with Boruto is after the sword ends up reaching its threshold, where Boruto's sword would then completely blacken, it would grant Boruto an explosion type ability, which he can direct when he slices somebody. Imagine Boruto slicing you and then you completely blow up at the same time. That would be something that is absolutely broken, and we did see Boruto fight alongside the likes of Jura, so the ability like that against wood style users who end up using wood style is something that would be absolutely absolutely broken. And this is not even mentioning the fact that Boruto is going to be able to amp his sword with the karma. So already the links with Nue is something that is quite apparent to me, due to the simple fact that Nue is something that has been central to Sumire's character since the beginning. It is something that deals with Nue's entire backstory. The fact that her father wanted her to detonate Nue in the Leaf Village as revenge for all of the harm that villagers had caused him and his family due to them simply having worked in the Foundation. This is central to Sumire's identity. So although it wasn't explored in the manga, we still see that it is canon through the various material that is sent out, and the whole fact that the Boruto anime is indeed canon. And so Nue to me is definitely going to have a lot of influence. And the fact that Sumire is not going to play this ninja role, she doesn't need to be a fighter. And in the past it has been shown that she doesn't have the best abilities when it comes to controlling Nue. When it came to events where people tried to hurt Sumire and then Nue ended up going out of control and biting other people and causing harm, Sumire had finally decided that she just simply didn't have the powers to do so. And it also came from the fact that she didn't want to have this fighting perspective. She didn't want to be a fighter. So due to that, it is quite likely that she ends up utilizing this power for somebody she loves, as Boruto, as I'm not able to control this power, but you are going to be able to do so. So I'm going to siphon this power in your blade to allow you to become even stronger. And that is a likely scenario that Sumire ended up taking in the future. Now this is my own personal beliefs, but I always love to hear what you guys think. And if you guys made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and definitely hit the like button if you agreed with anything I said. But if you didn't, you will most likely agree with a couple of these theories right here. The first one we're going to be discussing, and the most liked comment, is by K2J, and this is what he ends up saying. It's a living material because of which Kawaki won't be able to shrink it, and after activating karma, Boruto is still not as strong as Jiraiya for sure. So this is something we definitely agree. I completely agree with the fact that Boruto's sword is not a non-living material. It will count as living material, whether it is due to the simple fact that Boruto's sword has been infused with synthetic material that gives it living properties, or it is simply due to the fact that some people have mentioned in the past, just like the third Hokage's sword or weapon, it is actually a summoning at the end of the day, but the summoning takes this sort of form. This is something that also ends up working. But in my personal opinion, yes, Boruto with the karma is still not going to be enough. Maybe when Momoshiki ends up taking over, especially due to him fighting versus the Tentos, he may have this secret material or secret information that he is capable of using against Jiraiya, and then Jiraiya ends up losing. But I definitely agree. If Boruto is using the karma right now, I'm not saying he necessarily needs it for Momoshiki, but think about it story-wise. Why would they introduce the karma now and say that he needs the karma for Jiraiya if Boruto ends up using it against a threat like Momoshiki? If this was the weaponry that Boruto was going to use to defeat Jiraiya, or at least be as strong as Jiraiya, they wouldn't have introduced it versus Momoshiki, and that's just my own personal opinion. The second comment is by this guy right here. I don't want to pronounce your name wrong, so I'll just be showing you here. And he completely agreed with me. A fragment of Nue's body. Yes, Nue is still not canon, but it goes well with his abilities to absorb chakra. As we have already discussed, Nue is indeed canon, and obviously there are differences between anime canon and the manga canon, and we have also seen Nue being mentioned in the manga, so it is something that to me is similar to Mitsuki's Sage Mode. We didn't really see its beginning like we saw in the anime, but when Ikemoto is ready, he will introduce it just like he did with Mitsuki, and we'll all just have to be on board with that. That's my personal opinion. This next comment is by Jayski, and he says Shibai cells or karma cells, and I agree with this completely. One thing that I did end up mentioning is the fact that we have Sumire's influences. This whole process is something that Sumire developed on her own in the future, which means that her influences are those of Amado, Nue, and of Katasuke. And if Amado is somebody that is influencing Sumire, then Shibai cells would definitely be at play. as when Amato ended up leaving Jigen's hideouts, he did take with him aggregate data. We don't know exactly what that data may be, but if Kawaki is to keep getting more buffs, it is most likely that it is Shibai DNA. And because of that fact, if Boruto's sword ends up being enhanced by Shibai's DNA or give it some properties of Shibai, since it is Shibai Otsutsuki, anything will really make it stronger. Anything really makes sense because Shibai Otsutsuki is going to be the Hashirama cells for the Boruto series. So in my personal opinion, this makes a lot of sense if it is Shibai DNA. Do I personally want it to be Shibai? Not necessarily. I would personally rather the DNA of Shibai being implemented with a character like Kawaki, and I wouldn't want both characters to have influences from Shibai. That's just my own personal opinion. Would I be mad if that is the case? No, as long as it makes sense for the story, it is something that I see completely viable. The last comment we'll be discussing is by King Flocko24. He says, I think it's DNA of Nue, but I think it will be the reason why Momoshiki dies, kind of. As we know, Nue attacks negative emotions, right? So if he is attached to the sword and when Momoshiki takes over Boruto, since their chakra signatures are different, when he grabs that sword to protect himself, his soul/chakra will be sucked into the blade, and Boruto will have a living sword, which leads to Boruto and Kawaki's battle in the future, where Kawaki was fighting Momoshiki and got sealed into that sword, and Boruto got his body back and said what he said to Kawaki. Now this is definitely interesting, and he actually may be cooking up here. This may be the most interesting theory that I've heard in a while, and let's really break it down. So let's explain Momoshiki. Momoshiki is somebody with a soul and he has chakra. He no longer has a body, at least when it comes to his own individual body. So with any other character but Momoshiki, this really wouldn't end up making sense because they still have a body, so their soul will not be sucked in. So due to the fact that Momoshiki's powers reside simply in his sword, in his soul, since that is the only thing that is allowing him to technically be considered alive and actually take form, when he ends up using or taking over Boruto's body and using the sword, if it ends up being sucked in due to different levels of chakra. There are multiple instances in the story when Momoshiki took over Boruto's body, and then their chakra signals were so different that Sasuke and even Kawaki in the past were able to notice it. So it's definitely something that is viable. And since his chakra will be connected to his soul and not his body, if his chakra is absorbed, his soul will then be absorbed too. And it will definitely be the byproduct of Boruto, who ends up now having a living sword. That is definitely an interesting theory that I've never seen anybody discuss. So that is pretty original in my opinion. And I do like this a lot because it would almost be Kashin Koji's little trick. Due to the fact that Boruto figured this all regarding Sumire, probably due to Kashin Koji, as Boruto has not used any of Momoshiki's abilities to see the future in quite some time. So Kashin Koji may have planned this and not given Boruto all the information necessary, which is why he may have been curious about Momoshiki taking over. But as a safety measure to make sure everything is fine, he ended up telling Boruto to go do such and such with Sumire, giving him the scroll information so that Sumire could eventually lead towards Momoshiki being sealed in his sword. And it would also make sense to me. The simple fact that Momoshiki may not be what Sumire was thinking of, but as a byproduct of this ability that is given to the sword, we do end up seeing that Momoshiki ends up being sealed, and that's the way he is defeated. Potentially with this aspect of greed, just like in a piece of folklore that has been surrounding with Momoshiki's role in the story. If it follows that path, it would make quite a bit of sense. And if you want to figure out more about what exactly that folklore may be, you have to watch this video right here, as it is central to Momoshiki's future in the story.